Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming out to the National Library this afternoon. So, I'm Paula Williams, and I'm Curator of Maps, Mountaineering and Polar Collections here at the National Library of Scotland. And I'm delighted to talk to you today to mark International Women's Day. And thank you to Kenny for inviting me to talk again about some of my favourite women. This talk is a follow-up to the Petticoats and Pinnacles, which I wrote for the same occasion 5 years ago. And I was just saying to people sitting next to me in the audience here that it was really interesting that when I first did that talk, it was just a talk in the library. And then this time, for some reason, it's been really picked up and it seems to be off the moment. And I've been speaking on the radio, so it's going out on Radio Scotland this afternoon, and it's been in the Scotsman, and there's just a bit more of a buzz around the whole topic. The first talk looked at Scottish women's pioneering experiences in the mountains, writers, poets and artists, as well as climbers and explorers. It included writings by Jane Ingalls Clarke, Janet Adam-Smith, Betty Stark, Ika Gordon-Cumming and Nan Shepard. And today I'll be reading short excerpts from more of the women's writings. And maybe so it's more of an anthology, really, than a lecture, or if you like, a sort of taster menu of the kind of writing that's available. My selection from their writings is entirely personal. If any one of you were to conduct the same research, you would choose a different set of women and other quotations. And the wonderful thing about our collection here at the library is that any one of you could do that research, freely accessing the books, newspapers and archives that make up our world-class mountaineering collections. I'm quite certain that women were walking in high places long before we have records, and quite possibly taking the extra step to the summit. Walking was always deemed an acceptable feminine pastime, and for many it was a necessity as the only available mode of transport. Climbing and mountaineering were not considered acceptable and challenged both the masculine and the feminine ideal. Women climbers were often seen as an addendum to their fathers', brothers' or husbands' expeditions, as so-called new women, or simply non-existent until the early 20th century. It's important, though, to remember that while their achievements may be overlooked by history, they were often appreciated by those very family and club members. I don't want this to be an anti-male polemic by any means. A well-known example of the chauvinism, however, that women faced is the comment made by French alpinist Etienne Brule on the first all-female or manless ascent of the Aiguille de Grépon on Mont Blanc. The Grépon has disappeared. Of course, there are still some rocks standing there, but as a climb, it no longer exists. Now that it has been done by 2 women alone, no self-respecting man can undertake it. A pity too, because it used to be a very good climb. There is a theory that women's climbing achievements were not reported in press or periodicals for that very reason, so their history is hidden. And that's partly why I'm interested in it, to try and bring these mountain women and their stories out into the light. And the mountain women were not only fighting against expectations about their gender, but also about their social class and their own femininity. You said that no woman could manage it, a certain woman climber said to a well-known mountaineer after her ascent of the peak. No, he replied, I said, no lady. The women who did write for publication were aware of their audience and edited their adventures accordingly. For example, Jane Duncan, who we'll meet later, takes care to note that she bathed every day. Their adventures appear curious and interesting, but rarely really risky, and they don't talk about misery or fear, presenting a sanitized version of their experience. Where they exist, their diaries may tell a fuller tale. Imagine a world where women can walk on their own freely and safely. A world where being a girl isn't a reason not to do something. The women I'll speak about today have all done their part in making that a possibility. it's easier to follow than to lead. So the first part, we're going to look at women climbing in Scotland. And the earliest record I could find of a woman hill walking for pleasure came from a book in 1776, A Journey to the Highlands of Scotland, written by Mary Ann Hathaway. Ben Lomond rears his lofty head, as if he bid defiance to those clouds, which I have seen hanging miles below its top. This hill at the end of the loch is a wonder in its kind. Its sides appear a fine green. It is 6 miles from the base to the top. I should have liked to have ascended it, but found no one willing to accompany me on so romantic a tour, so was obliged to content myself with a distant view of this magnificent object. Sir J.C. told me there was a young Scotch lady that walked up in the morning and returned to dinner without appearing tired. I think I hear some fine lady amongst my own countrywomen who affect to be tired to death with a couple of turns in the mall exclaim, "Oh, how horrid! Indelicate creatures those women must be who could form such a plan, much less execute it." But I know you will join me in despising the affectation of those females who think, because indulgent fortune has thrown a coach in their power, they are not to make use of the gifts nature has bestowed. So she indicates not only that somebody was walking up Ben Lomond for pleasure, but the kind of social approbation that would go with it. And not all of my mountain women are climbers. Rather, they're what we would now term influencers. And one of these was Anne Grant. Anne was born in Glasgow, and after living with her family in Albany in North America, returned to Scotland and married a minister with a living at Laggan. Following his death, she was left with only a trifling pension to bring up 8 children, and so she took to writing. The book sold really well, and she ended up in Edinburgh hosting a salon that was frequented by Edinburgh society, including Walter Scott. This is a letter from the mountains, the correspondence of a lady, written at Fort Augustus on November the 6th, 1781. My dear friend, from this region of silence and shade, I thought to have written at length and at leisure, but leisure is so often slighted, I now vainly solicit. I must forsake my garden and all I love here, before nature opposes her irremediable bar. You will think I am talking very solemnly about travelling the 25 miles between here and Laggan, for I do not know that I ever told you how peculiarly we are situated with regard to each other. This district is divided from ours by an immense mountain called Coriaric. That barrier is impassable in the depth of winter, as the top of it is above the region of the clouds, and the sudden descent on the other side peculiarly dangerous, not only from deep snows concealing the unbeaten track of the road, but from whirlwinds and eddies that drive the snow into heaps, besides an evil spirit which the country people devoutly believe to have dwelt there time out of mind. I'm beginning to be on the spur homeward. Snow is now beginning to fall, but though I should ride on clouds and skies, I must get home immediately. Now I will give you a sketch of our situation, and you will say 'tis time. After crossing this awful mountain, we travel eastward through 12 miles of bleak, inhospitable country, inhabited only by moorfowl, and adorned here and there with a booth, erected for temporary shelter to shepherds, who pass the summer with their flocks in these lonely regions. On leaving this waste, you enter a vale 6 miles in length and half a mile broad, which wants nothing but wood to be beautiful. It has indeed some copses, or what the Scottish bards call shaws. This vale consists entirely of a rich meadow and arable lands, and has the clear and rapid Spey running through the middle of it. About the centre of this vale, at the foot of the mountain which screens it from the north wind, stands our humble dwelling. We have a great extent of moor and hill grazing, where they say we may feed some hundreds of sheep, a few suitable flock, for a person who ought to be much detached from secular cares, having a shepherd kept purposely to attend them. They require even in winter no food or shelter, but what the hills can afford. Our neighbours abound in courtesy and civility, and many of them, having been abroad in the army, are sufficiently intelligent. There is no amor patriae like that of the mountaineers everywhere. The people here are so entirely resume their early modes of living and thinking that they give probability to all we hear of those children of the rocks in other countries. Adieu. And at this time, mountaineers referred to people who dwelt in the mountains rather than those who climbed them. And although Anne refers to the mountain Coriaric as awful, her writings actually helped open up the Highlands. They became a destination for people to go. Queen Victoria's love of Deeside and the visits to Glen Mick and Lochnagar are well documented, and again a great influence on people's views of the Highlands. But here from her diaries, she visits another mountain. It was written at Blair Castle on Saturday the 21st of September in 1844. After breakfast, Albert saw Lord Glenlyon, who proposed to him to go deer stalking, and I to follow him, so I made up my mind to do so. Wrote letters, etc. before 11, and we drove off to Glentilt with Lord Canning. The day was glorious, and it would have been a pity to lose it, but it was a long, hard day's work, though extremely enjoyable and quite unlike anything I had ever done before. We drove to near Fraser's house, and there Albert and I walked about a little, and then we and Lord Canning mounted our ponies, Lord Glenlyon leading mine the whole way. We had besides old Peter, a wonderfully active man, leading the way, and Sandy and 6 other Highlanders carrying guns and leading dogs, the rear being brought up by 2 ponies carrying our luncheon box. Sounds like a good picnic. In charge of was Lolly, who was carrying one of Albert's rifles. The higher we went, the finer and more extensive the views became. The day was quite splendid with a very hot sun. We saw the highest top of Beniglo, which is not seen below, and the distant range of hills in a beautifully soft haze, as well as Loch Vach. The road was very good, and as we rode along, we had to talk in a whisper for fear of coming upon deer unawares, but the wind was in the right quarter. I wish we could have had Landseer with us to sketch our party. If only I had had the time to do so. We stopped at the top of Glen Grienan, from which one looks down a tremendous height and where eagles are sometimes seen. We next went to the top of Cairn Clamain, where we separated, Albert going on with Peter, Lowly and 2 other keepers to get a quiet shot, as they call it. Lady Canning, Lord Glenlyon and I went to the very top, the ground being quite deep and mossy, and here we sat down and remained some time sketching. The ponies were left below. The view of nothing but a sea of mountains and the complete solitude were very impressive. We heard 2 shots fired, after which my pony was brought up for me. From here we could see Mar Forest, and from the hill, called Scarsach, we could see the counties of Perth, Aberdeen and Inverness. We descended from this highest peak and proceeded to meet Albert, whom I described coming towards us, and we met him shortly after. He had had bad luck, I'm sorry to say. We sat down on the grass and had some luncheon, walked a little with Albert, and then mounted our ponies and rode homeward. Some deer were seen in Glencrowan, which is called the Sanctum. Albert went off soon after this, and we remained on Sruan Crow for nearly an hour, as Lord Glenlyon said we should turn the deer if we went on and spoil the whole thing. So we submitted. I could see Albert, like a little speck, creeping about on a hill opposite, and we saw 4 herds of deer, which was a beautiful sight. Got alarmed at seeing the sun sinking for fear of being benighted, and we called anxiously for Sandy to give a signal to Albert to come back. At length we got on the move, skirting the hill, and the ponies went as safely and securely as possible. As the sun grew lower, the scenery became more and more beautiful, and the sky the most brilliant colour. We got safely home by 7:45. A long day indeed, but one which I will not easily forget. And surely if even the Queen could spend time in the mountains, it must be sociable acceptable. However, she was always accompanied by men and was not climbing as such. Many women's first experiences of the hill was with their fathers or husbands or with a hired guide, and I suspect that accompanying menfolk on their shooting parties would have been quite common. Jane Ingalls Clarke was the first woman to write for the Scottish Mountaineering Journal, and this is from her first article, written in 1905, 3 on the centre grid of the Trident buttress Ben Nevis. After concealing the ski, we proceeded on our way, glissading gaily over the edge where we reached it, down into the Alta Vulan Glen. Shortly afterwards, we were enjoying our mountain midday meal at the lunching boulder. The rock scenery from this point is at all times unspeakably grand, but seen by the writer for the first time in regal winter garb, it made an impression never to be forgotten. Those wondrous cliffs, plastered and moulded with snow and ice, every crevice filled in with glistening white, soared upwards cornice-crowned to the sky. Our destination was a Trident buttress with its 3 ridges and 3 summits, which has given it the name. We made our way up the glacier-worn slabs of Corrina Keist, till level with the little tarn, still locked in its long winter deep under deep covering of ice and snow. After kicking steps up the rapidly steepening snow slope above it, we arrived at the bergschrund below the steep ice and snow-covered curtain of the rocks forming the lower portion of the central Trident. A short time for roping, rest and refreshment, and our leader started up the most promising-looking lead, a steep little couloir filled with hard snow. 60 or 70 feet up, we arrived at a pitch, a vertical wall where the many alterations of thawing and freezing had converted the snow practically into ice. This steep portion naturally required care. Above this, the angle was less for little, but we soon arrived at another, this time much higher, ice pitch. This was absolutely impossible, so our leader, Mr. Rayburn, traversed round to the left, across the awkward and dangerous traverse. Then rounding a corner, some steep ice-covered rocks were reached, after which we traversed another slippery ice ledge, this time to the right. We then gained the wide snowfield that here occupied the space between the north and south Tridents. Above us rose the final ridge. A direct attack on this proved unsuccessful in its ice-clad condition, but access was gained to a neat little pinnacle by an ice gully and steep ledges on our left. The climb now resolved itself into a pleasant scramble up a narrow snow-covered rock ridge which led to the summit. Fortunately for us, we had no cornice at this point to contend with, and we were free to enjoy the marvellous sight that suddenly burst upon us. We had been on the shady side of the mountain all the way up. But there, at the top, the sun's rays were shining dazzlingly on the grand cornices of Corndeer, which stretched away on either side of us, and below them the mighty precipices, deep in shadow, plunged down into the gloom of the valley with Gustave Doré effect. It was glorious to step up into the sunshine and feel that we had successfully accomplished a new climb under wintry conditions. The strong wind up here, which was a pleasant breeze down below, did not tempt us to dally. Saying farewell to the grand old Ben, we turned our faces homewards. A fair amount of glissading shortened our way, and as we neared Auchentree, we saw our faithful motor and party awaiting our return. Jane was 46 when she achieved that climb with her husband and Harold Rayburn and her son Charles. And Charles, who was on the climb with them, was unfortunately killed in the First World War, and many of you will know his name, Charles Ingalls Clarke, as being the hut that is now belonging to the SMC on Ben Nevis, which was gifted to them by Jane and her husband. And there's a wonderful film in the Moving Image Archive, which is available online, thanks to the SMC, of them opening the hut. So you can actually see Jane going into the hut and throwing the door open for all the climbers to come and see. And at that point on Ben Nevis, she's about 70, a remarkable and wonderful woman. And she's one of my favourites because she's just really understated. Her writing is beautiful and flips between being quite domestic and homey. She tells us about Charles losing his hat on the mountain, and then at the next minute, sublime in describing the scenery before her. And she was just an ordinary middle-class Edinburgh woman. So in many ways, not special at all, but she just went and did these things, which makes her special. And one of the things that she did was to found the Ladies' Scottish Climbing Club with her daughter Mabel Jeffrey and Lucy Smith in 1908. And they met at a boulder near the Licks Toll in Perthshire, and so the club was born. When I did the first version of this, or the first part of this lecture, over at the Ullapool Book Festival, there was a large contingent of ladies from the LSCC, and every time I mentioned, there was a woo from the back of the room. It was great. So, about the LSCC. It's hard to imagine nowadays the amount of determination and energy required by these essentially middle-class, conventional ladies to assert their right to be different and to climb independently of their menfolk. The club had the stated aim to bring together ladies who are lovers of mountain climbing and to encourage mountaineering in Scotland in winter as well as in summer. But I covered their achievements last time, so we're going to go on to a different club. The Pinnacle Club was the first to be formed specifically for women's rock climbing in 1921. It grew out of the Fell and Rock Climbing Club, which was a mixed club where women were welcomed. However, the women found that the ability to develop their own climbing skills and to lead all-female expeditions required a separate club. Echoing Miriam Underhill, who was one of the ladies who'd climbed the Grepon to that dreadful remark earlier. She said, "Very early I realised that the person who invariably climbs behind a good leader may never really learn mountaineering at all, and in any case enjoys only part of the varied delights and rewards of climbing. I did realise that if women were to really lead, that is, to take the entire responsibility for the climb, there couldn't be any man at all in the party." In 1947, the Pinnacle Club met at Glen Brittle. With Evelyn Leach and Nia Moran there, great things were done, they say in their book, The Pinnacle Club, A History of Women. Women climbing, not generally women. The meet record reads, "The two hostlers spent 3 days in getting to Glen Brittle through missing a connection at Stirling. They filled in the weekend by ascending Ben More from Crianlarich, the Tower Ridge from Glen Nevis, and then when they felt that they were all set for Skye at last, they found themselves on the wrong boat, bound for a 36-hour round trip to the Outer Isles and not touching on Skye at all. The sun-drenched Coolins looked tantalising. However, with 4 other hostelers who had made the same mistake, they transferred to the mail boat for rum, and from there a lobster boat brought them straight across to Loch Brittle in the evening." Paddy Hurst was also in Scotland this year. She was rarely able to attend Pinnacle Club meets, but that was by no means an indication that she had given up mountaineering, far from it. By degrees, she and her husband had been caught up in the passion known as Munroitis. Not an all-consuming passion, because they also went to the Alps when they could, and climbed in other areas, but nevertheless it was a steady love affair. They were the 8th and 9th people to complete the Munros, and the 5th and 6th to complete the tops as well. Paddy was the first woman to complete them, and was to remain the only one for many years. Despite, however, their principle of ladies first, John Hurst is firmly on the list as 8th, and Paddy as 9th. The differences between principles and practices are very strange. And of course, women are still climbing and walking in our hills and mountains. In 2005, Lorraine McCall completed the first female totally self-propelled round of the Munros to celebrate her 40th birthday. She thus pipped Cathy Murgatroyd's 1982 round by kayaking to the islands where Cathy had taken the ferry. 9 years later, Lorraine achieved the same for the Corbetts, this time yachting between the islands. And her achievements are all the more astonishing because she undertook it whilst recovering from invasive cancer surgery and chemotherapy. In an interview for the Summit magazine, she said she needed some time alone to recover, which she definitely got. By the end, she says, I had a much bigger sense of achievement from doing the Corbetts. They run all the way from the borders up to the top of Scotland and cover 6 islands too. Many of them start at sea level, which means the ascents are often more challenging. And although there were tracks up, better known ones like the Cobbler, that really wasn't the norm. They feel a lot wilder than the Munros. I think at one point I went through 56 mountains without seeing anyone else. And I can't talk about women mountaineers without talking about Nan Shepard. Nan was born in Petticoats, the west of Aberdeen, and she's now best known for her prose non-fiction masterpiece, The Living Mountain, which I would urge everybody to go and read because it's amazing. Spending time in the Cairngorms, she was moved to write about what she saw and felt, and she wrote poetry as well as both fiction and non-fiction, largely about her beloved mountains, or set in the area of her mountains. And here she's writing about how the mountains are stronger than all of us, female or male, in the Cairngorms. Images of beauty and of destruction. The pool, black as peat, still as a blade. No man so strong of limb, but its current is stronger. The tarn, luminous verdigris, still as a jewel. No sound, save once a thunder of snow from the corrie. No man so hot of blood, but finds death in its water. Summit of Scorandoo, snow driving dim on the blast. Far below, Loch Enoch, precipice-sided and sombre. No man so sure of self, but here he must tremble. Here man escapes from the futile sense of safety, the busy and cheerful acts that invade the soul. Here the destroying angel smites and they fail. And he knows again the sharpness of life, its balance, the mind springing and strong, poised against danger and pain. Nothing avails him here but the mind's own fineness. Now, whenever we talk about women climbers, inevitably discussion comes round to what they wore, with equal amounts of respect for their achievements whilst wearing long skirts and amazement at their outfits. And it's astonishing to us to see images of women in full crinolines upon the Mer de Glace in Chamonix, as in this image. But Chamonix was effectively the tourist honeypot of the time, and I can't help but be reminded of inappropriately dressed tourists in flip-flops on the top of Ben Nevis. So I'm not sure how genuinely representative these kind of images are. William Kersley Holmes, in Tramping Scottish Hills, comments, "Let me here remark that women on mountains often seem free from the tyranny of certain natural laws to which men are subject. Regarding footwear, they are particularly mysterious. I have seen a lady dressed and shod as for Princes Street, strolling up the Ben Nevis path with not a hair out of place. I believe she carried a sunshade, and she reached the top, which is more than can be said for some who start out more appropriately equipped." Jane Ingalls Clarke said that suitable nailed boots were not to be had in this country, and boys' tweed suits were only available outfit for women. When I appeared in my boy's suit made by Forsyths, and wearing my big hobnailers, my own mother couldn't endure the spectacle and cried, "What a fright you look!" It was not done in those days. So resorting to boys' outfits may have worked at the beginning of the 20th century, although still not to be worn in general public. For the women of the previous century, travel costumes were more difficult to come by and included cunning contraptions to draw up the skirts to make them shorter for walking. Again, though, with Queen Victoria's influence, the great outdoors became a fascination, a destination in its own right, and clothes were designed to enable ladies to do just that. I came across this lovely advertising booklet from McDougall & Co. of Inverness and Sackville Street, London, The History of the Industrial Products of the Mountain and Glen from 1868. And they are by special appointment to Her Majesty, and they refer to the noblest ladies in the land, who are at this stage Queen Victoria's daughters, Alice, Helena and Louise, who would have worn these kind of outfits for their outdoor pursuits. The Abigail jacket, christened after the autumnal residence of a most august and gracious patroness, commends itself to ladies of taste at the first glance by reason of its unique and graceful style. It certainly is. Don't think I'd like to go up a hill in it, though. Imagine on a windy day what would happen. So thank goodness for the Rational Dress Society. These are my new favourite people. The Rational Dress Society was an organisation founded in 1881 in London, and one of the society's founders was Florence Wallace Pomeroy, or Viscountess Haberton, who created a divided skirt. Her previously creation was the Short Skirts League, whose members would wear skirts at least 5 inches above the ground when out walking. And you can see here the aims of the society. They went on to advocate the replacement of the corset with a chemise of strong supportive fabric to which a divided skirt could be buttoned instead of the usual petticoat. They were also hopeful of promoting the divided skirt, or to quote, some sort of two-legged skirt for use in lawn tennis, tricycling and skating. There's been some proper academic research conducted into the effect of the Rational Dress Society on women, particularly with cycling, but I haven't yet found any on mountaineering and climbing, and I think that would be a really interesting area for people to look at. So if anybody wants to go and do it, that would be lovely. The two-legged skirt could effectively be converted into bloomers by the clever use of drawstrings around the bottom of each leg. Although I have read a diary entry where one of the ladies was actually complaining that the rings where the threads went through then got clogged with snow and the whole thing became really heavy and very wet and uncomfortable. So I'm not sure that it was the ideal walking option. And there seems to have been some kind of conflict between the so-called hygiene related to women's healthy exercise and the art of high fashion, which I suspect is a state that we're still in all this time later. The divided skirt was, however, adopted by some adventurers, although often with a short skirt on top. This is Isabella Bird Bishop, and in the note to her second edition of A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. For the benefit of other lady travellers, I wish to explain that my Hawaiian riding dress is the American lady's mountain dress, a half-fitting jacket, a skirt reaching to the ankles, and full Turkish trousers gathered into frills falling over boots. A thoroughly serviceable and feminine costume for mountaineering and other rough travelling, as in the Alps or any other part of the world. And here on the glacier, you can see the ladies have got their skirts curled up at the bottom, so they have a little bit more free movement. The slightly scary face of the lady in the middle is, I think, caused by wearing a cotton mesh face mask to stop being burnt by the sun, because of course ladies shouldn't look like they've been outside. In art as applied to dress from a similar kind of period, 1885, artistic dress, the purpose for which it is required, must first be taken into account. If for walking, climbing mountains, driving, yachting, or any active outdoor exercise, it needs to be light, sufficiently warm and strong. In construction, it must be as simple as possible, leaving the limb unimpeded and the action in action and having no useless extraneous ornaments. The hat should cover the head, and if for rough work, should be one which will obviously not become draggled and spoiled by wet. Ostrich feathers or plush trimmings are wholly unfitted for this kind of dress. Jane Duncan, who again we'll meet again later in her book, A Summer Ride Through Western Tibet, tells us a bit more about her outfits, and I'm quite interested that she has adopted some of the local costume. And she says, one of the joys of the expedition was getting away from dress with its worries, as distinguished from mere clothes. And many a time after returning to civilization, I longed to be in the desert again, where the crows and the goats didn't care what I wore. I took 3 woolen coats and skirts, 1 thick and 2 thin, some flannel blouses, warm and cool woolen underclothing, a long coat, a golf cape, and a large fur cloak, a helmet and a soft cap for wearing in the tent or in the evening. You can tell she wasn't carrying all this herself. When the weather was hot, the fur cloak was anathematized, and when it was cold, it saved my life. For foot gear, I had the cashmere chapleys, sandals with lining soles of felt, which are worn over socks of sambre leather, which is similar to chamois, made like lacing boots, and these socks are drawn over stockings, and the whole arrangement is so comfortable that it's like treading on velvet and prevents the feet being jarred on rough stony tracks. For use on grass, the soles are studded with nails, but chapleys are not suitable for wet ground. For riding or wearing in the tent in cold weather, I had a pair of Gilgit boots, which are the same shape as guardsmen's boots, the stiff quilted cloth tops coming well above the knees, the soles and galoshed part being of thick, untanned leather. They are made very roomy so as to avoid pressure on the feet, which would interfere with the circulation of the blood. The stores, etc., are packed in kiltas, or leather-covered panniers, and my personal luggage was a small cabin trunk, a large canvas bag, and a hold-all. But the trunk was sent back from Lee with its contents as a mere superfluity. Now, she says superfluity, but I have to tell you that Jane wasn't slumming it in any way. Her tent was floored with embroidered scarlet felt, and she carried with her a lead bath in a basket, with an inner basket containing all her table linen, including some Japanese paper napkins. The innovation at the end of the 19th century in women's fashion of the three-piece suit, with a plain shirt, tailored jacket and loose skirt, provided an outfit which could be easily adapted for sports. And many images of the early climbers show this kind of clothing. And this again are the ladies of the LSCC, with Jane Ingalls Clarke here in the middle, with a rather large hat, I have to say. And to our modern eye, even these outfits seem quite ludicrous for walking in. And today, of course, we have performance fabrics and special climbing shoes for rock and boots for winter climbing, and ever more specialised. However, for many, the fit of these is still poor. Larger sizes, in particular, seem to be anything above a size 14, may not be available, and where they are, they're quite often designed for tall women. So those of us who are short, curvy, Celtic in our shape still struggle to find appropriate gear. So we're going to move on to Scots climbing abroad, Scots women climbing abroad. And in my previous Petticoats and Pinnacles, I managed to find a Mrs. and Miss Campbell who were successful in crossing the 11,000 feet high Col de Giant from Chamois to Cormier between France and Italy in the Mont Blanc Massif in 1822. And I didn't know anything else about them apart from that. And I've managed now to go back and trace the original reference to them, which is in Frederick Clissold's account of the 15th ascent of Mont Blanc. And it's one of the wonderful things about working with the collection here, is that you can work your way back through references until you finally get to the original, which is just a delight. So from his narrative, on the 18th of August, 1822, two ladies, Mrs. and Miss Campbell, celebrated for the extensive and courageous excursions among the Alps, started at midday with 8 guides from the priory at Chamonix, with the intention of traversing the Col de Giant and of descending the opposite Vale. Clissold's party fell 3 hours behind due to difficulties and what he described as wearied guides. Witnessing the sunset, we came to a plateau behind the Rocher Rouge, in view of Chamonix, and now, mounting my handkerchief upon a pole, a soft breath of wind spreads its folds and floated it gently in the air as a signal to the priory of our happy triumph. I had expected to reach this spot early enough to hail the ladies referred to in the earlier part of the narrative, as they passed the Col de Giant about 4,000 feet below us. But as they have since informed me, their passage over this part of the mountain was effected some hours previously. And he adds in a footnote, Mrs. and Miss Campbell, these ladies have shown how female intrepidity may finally surmount danger where even the experience of guides may fail. Previous to my arrival at the Priory, they had expressed a determination to ascend the summit of Mont Blanc at the next season of their return to Chamonix. With the result being that I'm now even more intrigued about who on earth Mrs. and Miss Campbell is. And it's one of the issues around doing historical research about many of these ladies is they're only known by their husbands' names or referred to as Mrs. Campbell or Mrs. Hamilton or whatever it happens to be. But it means that they're really hard to track back through the records. And I would love to know the bit about them being celebrated for the extensive and courageous excursions among the Alps. What else have they done? And can we find that? It's fascinating. Perhaps a more well-known lady explorer, although not born here in Scotland, was based in Edinburgh for a good part, and therefore we've kind of adopted her, from her lady's life in the Rocky Mountains, which we referred to earlier. The scenery, and here she is in the Rocky Mountains. The scenery up here is glorious, combining sublimity with beauty, and in the elastic air, fatigue has dropped from me. This is no region for tourists and women, only for a few elk and bear hunters at times, and its unprofaned freshness gives me new life. The eastward mountains, which had been grey, blushed pale pink. The pink deepened into rose, and the rose into crimson. And then all solidity etherealized away and became clear and pure as an amethyst, while all the waving ranges and the broken pine-clothed ridges below etherealized too, but into a dark, rich blue, and a strange effect of atmosphere blended the whole into one perfect picture. It changed, deepened, reddened, melted, growing more and more wonderful, while under the pines it was night, till having displayed itself for an hour, the jewelled peaks suddenly became like those of the Sierras, wan as the face of death. For later, the cold golden light lingered in the west, with pines in relief against its purity, and where the rose light had glowed in the east, a huge moon upheaved itself, and the re-flicker of forest fires vividly streaked the mountainsides near and far off, and I realised that night had come with its eeriness. Beautiful writer. Jane Ellen Duncan is the elder daughter of William Duncan of Glasgow, and she wrote A Summer Ride Through Western Tibet in 1906. She was born in 1848, so she was a reasonable age for ladies of that time when she decided to go trekking off through the Himalayas. And pretty much all we know about her, I think, is from her gravestone, which is in Naples, which records that she died just 3 years later in 1909. The Changla and Pangkong So. The Changla is 17,500 feet in what is now Ladakh, and it's the second highest motorable road in the world. But obviously at this point was not metalled. On Monday, June the 27th, I got up at 4 a.m. and breakfasted outside as usual while my tent was being taken down. There was a thin coating of ice on the pools of water among the stones, and my fingers were so numb that I could hardly use them. The servants were blue with cold and had muffled up their necks. For the 3 or 4 miles of ascent from Zindral, the way is amongst boulders, over which my pony had to make such a jump that Savannah walked beside me to steady me in the saddle and catch me if I fell out. This man marched for 23 miles that day, and I never once heard him breathe audibly. The pony panted a good deal and had to stop pretty often to take breath, but it was rather fat, and Aziz Khan's, which was thinner, did better. At 7 o'clock we reached the summit, and for a mile or so crossed a level tract of crisp snow of a couple of inches deep. By this time the sun had risen well above the mountain tops near us and warmed the air, and it was beautiful to see his beams lighting up one rocky pinnacle after another, and shining on the snowy range on the other side of the Indus far behind. At the summit there was a Hlatha of stone, where the spirit of the past dwells. This is a cairn surmounted by a prayer flag and branches of willow or poplar, and with ibex and sheep's horns stuck in the sides. And although there was little snow on the level, which was in shadow, the mountain sides were mostly clear of it, for at least 500 feet up, and still higher up, though they reached 20,000 feet above the sea, it lay only in streaks and patches, except where they faced the north, and there was a solid field of it there. At sea level, the pressure of the air on the square inch is at 15.22 pounds, At 18,000 feet, a little higher than the Shangla, it is at 7.66 pounds, and this reduction brings on headache, dizziness and bleeding at the nose and ears in many cases, while if the heart is at all weak, the consequences may be very serious. Even hill ponies sometimes spin round and drop down dead. There was a skeleton of one lying beside the Hlatha. But in my own case, I felt the air so exhilarating that I could have laughed and sung from pure joy. And I was in the saddle for 7.5 hours continuously that day without feeling tired. The Cardar at Chimray had told Aziz Khan he had never seen a lady go over this pass before, and he did not think I should attempt it. But Aziz Khan said I was a strong traveller, and he thought I could do it. As it turned out, he was justified in his belief, and he didn't tell me of this conversation until many months afterwards. Between early June and late September 1904, I crossed 8 passes, varying in height from 14,000 to 18,000 feet, besides the Zoji La at 11,300 feet, which was the most fatiguing of all, and also the Diosi Plains with an average of 13,000 feet, without having a touch of headache or mountain sickness. Remarkable woman. Yuna Cameron was a daughter of the Dure whisky family and spent her life basically climbing. She built a house for herself at Courmayeur, which she bequeathed to the Italian Alpine Club. Her habit of wearing trousers and smoking were deemed scandalous. And her archive and diaries are here in the library and are particularly beautiful and illustrated with all sorts of little drawings and cartoons. And this is one of Una there on the right with her 2 favourite climbing companions, Elise and Edouard. And here she is climbing in the Kazbek area of the Caucasus, which was then the USSR, so they'd had to use Intourist to even get to the mountains. Finally, we arrived at a beautiful place beside a glacier stream in the shadow of the 3 rock towers. We made tea, opened a tin of ham, ate what we wanted, and left it in the burn to try and get the salt out, and sent Nico off with Zavtrosti, which we hoped meant tomorrow, here. But he looked wicked and was explaining apparently the futility of our demands and giving graphic representations of horses falling from fatigue. Good flat grass. No one will slide through the door here, which implies that they had on previous adventures fallen through the tent, and plenty of water. This is a good line. And that's the name of the one and only book that she actually published, was privately published in 1932. It rained all day. We climbed about on the rocks near the tent. Not a single person turned up, and we felt very satisfied with the new camp. When the hills were visible above the mist, they were enough to make the toes twitch. We went up to the head of the valley to get a view of the hills. Fate and mist were against us, and we got some good exercise and saw a lot of horses and cattle, but no hill higher than 2,500 metres. Elise was restless sometime early, and I vaguely realised he was studying the weather. Later the mist was still far down, but evidently conditions were hopeful, for we all turned out, drank some tea, collected our crampons, and at about 9:30 ploughed up the steep grass slopes leading to the rock towers, the Chokchi. There were a lot of wild turkeys and the grass was full of flowers. Grass, scree and a few easy rocks took us to the couloir in 2.2 hours. As the couloir was practically perpendicular, we put on crampons, but the snow was foul, heavy and wet, and then through a waterfall and various showers, we arrived at the summit in a hailstorm at 1:30. But there was mist all the time, so we saw very little. This time included halts. We divided the Horlicks tablets and put them in the pockets, where the rain quickly altered them into something very unpleasant in appearance, but quite edible. The rock was good, only there was a lot of loose stones. Coming down, there was a fine snow couloir, or scree according to choice, so we dug the heels in and hurried. Times 4 hours up, 3 down. And although this is from her published book, you can see very much how it's taken from her notes that are in her diary, and what she was really concerned about was how long, it was all about the climbing, how long it took to do them, finding the routes. But not everybody's writings are like that. And Kathleen Jamie is a poet and author who's now Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Stirling, and she travelled in the Karakoram in the Himalaya. And rather than necessarily adventuring and exploring, she's much more aware of her impact on the local community and of theirs on her. And the modern climber or explorer faces perhaps different challenges to the earlier women. Not only do they still face some misogyny and social prejudice, depending on where they're going or climbing, but they also have to be more aware of their environmental and cultural impact. What do they bring with them and what do they leave behind? And Kathleen describes a new road being built into Ascoli, which is this village and the last outpost, if you like, before the climb to K2. I sat at the edge of the new road. It was still raw looking across the river at the old path. I was beginning to torture myself about this business of implication. Don't interfere. Of course we interfered. Why were they building the last bridge if not to bring the tourists in jeeps? Was it built for my betterment? No. Someone joked that one day the Balti women would all have jobs driving tourists in jeeps to K2 base camp. But Ascoli was on the brink of the biggest change. Had I done this? Had we all done this? And was it good? If you got the trekkers out of the graveyard into a nice little hotel and a regular shipment of kerosene so the trees went undamaged, wouldn't it be the last word in problem containment? I had a sudden mad image of a trekker in full flashy gear, the kind of gear we think it necessary to wear in a land where folk subsist in rags, climbing over the village stile, hand in hand with a black swathed mullah. Here we are, we have arrived. We surprise ourselves sometimes with what we are capable of. I didn't think I was a person capable of walking down a Himalayan track on a summer's morning all alone, but I was. A simple thing enough to walk between two villages with a bamboo stick in one hand, but everything presents itself to our Western minds as choice. And the local woman with whom Kathleen lodged and whom she became friends, writing letters after she'd left, did not understand her choices. They lived securely in Purda, and for them the choice to be safe was paramount. Rashida wrote to her, "Your lifestyle is very strange and very difficult for us, because you know we are Purda observing, we live in home and safety, and you know how much we are happy and fully satisfied. We have no problems and difficulties. We live a simple and Islamic life. I am very surprised to know you are living in a flat with your friends without your parents. Now, what is your planning? Here, I want to give you a suggestion if you don't mind. I'm giving you a proposal. I want you to live with us in our country forever. If you want to marry here, it'll be good. If you want, you write to me and we'll arrange your marriage. I assure you, you'll be very happy here. Your life will pass in peace and safety." Kathleen says, "I walked a few miles, then rested the weight of my rucksack against a boulder and looked at the villages downstream. I could have children and maybe no worries. But I am a person walking down a track in Baltistan all alone on a Wednesday morning. I was capable, and sometimes a glimpse of what we could be opens in our mind, like the fearsome blue crevasses I'd seen on the glaciers. I could be a person who lives here. Tie a few things on a donkey and walk the Himalayas. No matter how ridiculous the discovery, the hint of a possibility, it poses a choice. Either you act upon it or annul it." And so, we all have a choice, whether to follow or to lead. That's not to imply that there is any shame ever for any of us in following, only that the reason for not leading should not be because you're a woman. All our women today made a choice. They chose to defy convention, to scandalise, or just plain confuse their friends, and in some cases to risk their lives. And they all chose the mountains. Thank you.